today from Dorset in England is Nick Holme, who is the brother of one of the favourite guests I've had on the show, a very popular guy called Ed Holme, a very good friend of the show. And Nick is, originally a farmer in Zimbabwe and now a conservationist, mental health advocate, and now an adventurer. How are you doing, Nick?
Very well, thanks, Nicholas. It's very kind of you to have me on your podcast. Thank you.
That's a great pleasure. It's very interesting to talk to you. Ed obviously is a good friend of mine from back in the day. We were in the army together. And now it's a pleasure to speak to you. Speak to you after what you've been up to in Zimbabwe and Zambia, which is, you did a little walk around a lake. Is that right?
Yes, it was a little walk around a lake. I can go into it in a bit more detail now if you like. It is the world's largest man-made lake. It was built in the 50s and 60s and actually opened in, I'm trying to remember now, 1965, I think it was, by the late Queen Mother. And so it was a hydroelectric scheme that was built and probably the largest one of its kind then and still is now, I think, for what were then known as the two Rhodesias, Northern and Southern Rhodesia, now Zambia and Zimbabwe, and a very successful one has been.
I didn't realize that North Rhodesia was now Zambia. I just thought Rhodesia was Rhodesia.
No. And an interesting little fact, Zambia became independent in 1964. I think it's the only country in the world. They were holding the Olympics in Tokyo at the time, and it went into the Olympics as Northern Rhodesia and came out as Zambia. So different flag, different country, and all of that. The independence came in the middle of the Olympics. But yes, so there was a federation known as the two Rhodesias and Nyasaland. Nyasaland being the current day Malawi, Northern Rhodesia being Zambia, and Southern Rhodesia being is now Zimbabwe. Yeah.
So let's go back. I want to find out how you got into conservation in the first place. It's a very interesting subject for me. Who doesn't want to preserve wildlife? I think it's a very noble cause. But how did you get into it?
So I was born and brought up on a farm in Zimbabwe. So nature and the bush has always been part of my DNA, for want of a better expression. And, as children, we were always out in the bush. There were always wild animals around. As I grew up, I got into farming myself and then left Zimbabwe in 2000 and moved over to the UK, where I got involved in what people call real life, married, children, schools, education, all that sort of stuff. Never really had an opportunity to do what I really want to do, which was get involved in conservation. Then COVID struck and all business came to an end. I was working very closely with my brother, Ed, who you mentioned earlier. He's based in Zimbabwe, and we were pushing investment into Zimbabwe. We held a couple of investment conferences in London for the country. But COVID knocked everything on the head. And I was sitting in my office trying to work out how best I could serve the conservation purpose, because when tourism dried up, that was the source of income for all conservation efforts around the world, not just in Zimbabwe or Africa, around the world, really. And conservation relies a lot on tourist money to keep it going. So I became involved by default almost. I'm working with an organization that started up as a result of COVID called the Zambezi Conservation Alliance. Ed and I have always had this passion for conservation and for our wildlife and our wild spaces. And yeah, it's just sort of evolved as a result of that. And I must say that out of bad comes good, from COVID, from my own personal perspective at any rate. It's been a great opportunity to move into conservation before we all get too old.
And so just go into a little bit about the problem you mentioned, the lack of tourism, which has the problem of conservation. Is it all, like many things in our life, in modern life now, it seems to be down to money. And I guess that without the money, you can't pay the people to protect the animals.
Yeah, that's so true. Basically, I was at a fundraising evening in London about 3 years ago now, where a young girl was speaking. She must have been about 15 or 16 at the time. She said, "How can we love something that we've never seen before?" And leading on from that, tourists who come out to any part of the world, I assume, but I'm basing mine on the Zimbabwean experience, really get the feel of Africa, get the love of for the animals. And as a result, they end up supporting whatever conservation efforts are in the area that they visit. And not only that, the hotels, the safari lodges, the camps, all put aside a proportion of their own earnings into conservation issues. And so when the planes stopped flying, the tourists stopped arriving, that money dried up. And yes, it does boil down to money. Money is the biggest need in conservation. I can't remember what the global figures are, something like 60 billion a year spent on conservation, and we actually need about 600 billion a year. And so conservation itself needs to find alternative sources of income. COVID's shown that we just can't rely on tourism, but that is the main source of income at the moment.
$600 billion a year. I mean,
I think it's something. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?
It's a hell of a lot of money. I mean, that's pretty much what we're putting into Ukraine right now.
Yeah, exactly. We're spending an awful lot of money on trying to destroy ourselves and whatever else is around, and not actually preserving or putting it into the conservation of what we've got left. It sort of beggars belief. I think we're all aware of the fact we need our natural world. We're all aware of the fact we need biodiversity, and yet we're not really taking it as seriously as we ought to. We've got to put that money into conservation. You think about it, though. I saw somewhere a couple of days ago the global GDP of the world is something like 95 trillion. 600 billion for our own survival, whether it's physical or mental. It's not really that much.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to suggest that if you put the vote to the people, the average person in the street, what would they rather spend the money on? Would it be war or conservation? I think it would be a pretty much resounding 95%, certainly heavily weighted on the favor of the conservation. Anyway, I'm glad you're out there doing these things. I'm going to bring up a little slightly controversial topic, because I actually saw this on Instagram, I think yesterday or this morning, and it was a conservation page and the page is called Sea, as in the ocean, sea. And they put up pictures of people who had trophy hunted in Africa, and it was big game, mainly lions. So, and I read the comments, and it's overwhelming. Shoot the bastards. This and that and the other. These people don't deserve to live. They're vile, as you could imagine. And I understand. don't get me wrong. I actually understand very well what they're saying, because I don't necessarily agree with it. Okay. However, there's always two sides of the story. There's never just one side of the story, and it's a very, very controversial subject, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, because you're on the ground. Well, you've been on the ground there, and you know much more about it than I do. But you have these private game reserves, and they're fenced. So the animals they're huge. Don't get me wrong. They're enormous, size of small countries type things. And the people who run these game reserves offer hunting trips where you can come and shoot a lion. You come and hunt and stalk it, and you can shoot a lion, which again doesn't sound, certainly not something I would like to do. But what people, conservationists, and with the best intention, don't get me wrong here, what they sometimes don't realize is that when they're not fully wild animals, but they're effectively wild animals. They're not, they're not herded into pens or anything like that. They're left to pretty much roam wild. But occasionally, to maintain the numbers, you have to cull. If there are too many lions, the deer, the ungulates, the prey animals, they get annihilated. And if it's the other way around, there's a balance that has to be maintained. So people will pay a lot of money to come and shoot an animal, a wild animal, a beautiful wild animal, and they'll pay a lot of money, and then that money goes into the local ecosystem and the meat, because they're not allowed to bring the meat back out of Africa, as far as I know, what I've heard. And so this animal would have been killed anyway, killed. It's a very controversial subject, Nick. What's your view on it? I'm putting you on the spot here.
You've asked the question about something that is extremely controversial, and one I try and avoid, because there isn't a black and white answer to this. However, I'll try and answer it. I don't think there's any conservationist in the world who would like to see hunting. I don't think any conservationist in the world would like to see animals killed in this way. However, conservation does need money. And if hunting is managed properly, and if some of that money does get reinvested into the ecosystem and the local communities, then in the absence of any other form of raising that finance in the meantime, then it's probably a very necessary thing. There are, unfortunately, people who are not that scrupulous, which gives hunting a very bad name. I know a number of hunters who I would say are very, very good conservationists. They are people who do protect the land that they're hunting on. A lot of it's vested interest, but they do collect snares. They stop animals being poached. They stop animals being snared. And it's very hard to turn around and say that, killing a lion, which is part of an endangered species, is a good thing. You raise the issue of too many predators in one space, and people would counter-argue by saying relocate them. Relocation's an expensive business and not that easy. Relocation of elephants is not that easy. On my walk around Lake Kariba, which I can go into a bit later, I spent quite a bit of time talking to local communities about human-wildlife conflict and seeing how humans and wildlife could coexist. And problem animals are also killed, ones that destroy crops or kill people. So the can of worms that you've opened up there is a very difficult one to answer straight away. But I think ultimately it's part of a toolbox of measures that help conservation. But I should think every conservationist in the world would much rather that there were alternatives that brought in an income. But until such alternatives are found, hunting is a necessary evil.
Yeah, a necessary evil is a good way of putting it. And it's a bit messy, it's a bit grey. And I'm with you. I agree with what you're saying. I'd rather it didn't happen, but I guess, and it's a bit, I feel a bit dirty saying this, but I'd rather see it, like you said, managed and done properly than, seeing a rhino, an endangered rhino slaughtered, the body left, and they just had taken the horn. And, that money is used to put rangers out there to make sure this doesn't happen. And so...
Well, sometimes they're not even slaughtered. Sometimes they're still alive when they have the horn cut off. I've seen video images of rhino that have been shot, still wounded, had the horn taken off, and have to be euthanized as a result. So this poaching is terrible. The true hunter will go for a clean kill if they can, and I can bet you my bottom dollar that there's going to be people watching this who then going to be saying, yeah, but hunting's bad regardless. You shouldn't murder. You shouldn't. It's controversial, but poaching's worse.
I know, and that's why it's a sticky subject. But you answered. I think you answered that one very well. So, with your conservation, are you doing anything in Zimbabwe itself?
Um, yes, yeah, we are. As part of the Zambezia Conservation Alliance, we are involved with a number of the smaller NGOs, the people on the periphery of the major national parks, trying to help them, promote them, looking to raise finance for them and all that sort of stuff. Working with Ed, we have a sort of follow on from the walk. The walk is just the beginning of what we're trying to do, which is basically promoting conservation, mental health, the link between conservation and mental well-being. But ultimately, it is only the beginning. We had to do the walk to prove that we could walk the talk, and to raise this awareness. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is create what we're calling TERRAs, training, education, research, rehabilitation, and awareness centers, initially in Zimbabwe and Zambia, and then, as they expand and if they work out well, into other countries. And these are basically centers that vary in size from, say, a couple of hectares to a couple of 100,000 hectares, where we can conduct the research needed into conservation and into mental health, where we can help people with mental health problems come rehabilitate themselves in these centers. The magic of the bush is just out there for everyone to get involved in if they really, really wanted to. We are getting involved in a number of issues, the walk being the very beginning of them. We will be holding next year what we call Zimdabas, which is an Indaba is a sort of meeting, a gathering for tourism and conservation and mental health in Zimbabwe. I was involved in a conference in Botswana earlier on this year, which was focused on the illegal wildlife trade and trying to stop the financial flow of money in the region. We're not just looking at Zimbabwe, we're looking at the region, the Zambezia region, which is basically 7 or 8 countries that feed the Zambezi River. It's a unique ecosystem. And so it's not Zimbabwe alone per se, it's just where we happen to have our strengths and where we know people. And where there is actually very, very good game management and national park management practices in place already. There are a very professional bunch of people out there who are doing a great job, both in government employ and in the private sector.
So to make it, hopefully again, a more cheery note, do you, with the conservation efforts in your region, is it making a difference? Is it having a positive benefit? Because I read some places that you hear that in, let's say, one part of Africa, there's one white rhino left. But in other parts of Africa, and let's not forget how big Africa is here, it's enormous. In other parts of Africa, you have a relatively thriving white rhino population. And we hear about the same with lions and elephants, et cetera, et cetera. How is it, from your point of view, is it getting better? Is the situation getting better?
Yeah, I think it is. You're right in saying that Africa is a very large place. It consists of, I think it's 54 countries, and has a very large population and a growing population. But in southern Africa, which is what I know best, conservation is working. There are a lot of dedicated people out there doing a great job. In places like East Africa, I think conservation is working, but they've had the most horrendous droughts. Animals are dying of hunger and thirst. One of the ironies of countries like Zimbabwe is that their conservation methods are a little bit too successful, in that there are now, in some parts of the country, too many elephants. And you wouldn't have thought anyone would ever say that, but the population of elephants is actually too great for the carrying capacity of the land, and therefore creating a brand new dilemma. The whole biodiversity, the whole ecosystem is under threat because of this, and yet, because of their success and because there are too many, they need to do something, which is either creating elephant corridors through into other countries, or having to. The most drastic situation is having to cull. Now imagine that, having to cull an animal that's generally accepted as an endangered species. And that's something no one wants at all, absolutely no one wants. So, yeah, I would say conservation is winning. But there are a lot of people out there wanting to kill the last rhino and wanting to get that ivory. And on top of that, there are an awful lot of hungry people who, because of COVID, because of the fact they haven't, had a proper job for 2 or 3 years and haven't been able to earn an income to support their family, they're going out and poaching for their own food. There's a lot of snares around. So there's this constant battle between rangers and poachers, which I saw, during my walk and experienced during the walk around Lake Kariba. And it's a constant battle, but I think it is proving to be successful in some countries. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just talk about your walk, because first you have to tell us how long it was, because you're out there for a considerable period there, Nick. You lost, how much did you lose? Stone and a half, so 33 pounds.
I lost 33 pounds. Yeah. I needed to.
Was that about 13 kilos?
15 kilos.
15 kilos. Exactly. Hey, not bad. Okay, well, tell us about it. It was a long way, and you're out there for a long time.
So, yes, it was a long way. It was 900 kilometers, which is about 560 miles, I think. It is still the world's largest man-made lake, so it's a big thing. It's an inland ocean. When the lake fills up, there are actually earthquakes in the region, and when it empties, similarly, when the plates resettle, there are more earthquakes. And it took 38 days of walking, 52 days in all, including rest days and sorting out paperwork and immigration and all of that sort of stuff to get through into Zambia from Zimbabwe. We sort of, when I started the walk, I wasn't as fit as I'd like to have been, and it was a rude awakening, having trained in the soft, lovely, lush countryside of Dorset, to hitting the hard ground and the heat of the Zambezi Valley. But your body gets used to it after a while.
I should also mention, sorry to interrupt, but I should also mention that this walk had never been done before. You're the first guy who did it.
Correct. One or two people have walked either side. No one's ever done as a sort of single effort a total walk around Lake Kariba. So yes, it is a first. Never been done before. That's correct.
And how old are you, Nick?
I turned 53 just before I started the walk. So okay. Early 50s. Yeah.
Well done you. So tell us all about it. I want to hear. It sounds wild, and what people fail to realize, I think, if you remember that movie Coming to America, remember that Eddie Murphy movie when he plays an African prince who moves to New York, and they go, he's in his palace in this fictional country of, I think it was called Zamunda or something, and there's gazelles running across the lawn, elephants walking past, rhinos. And although it's not quite like that, but as a farmer, you have to deal with sometimes enormous wild animals, and also, huge predators like tigers and leopards and that kind of thing. Not tigers, what am I saying? Wrong continent. Lions. I meant to say lions. Large cats, anyway. So just making the point that you're in the bush, you're in the wild. There are no roads. You're in the bush, as we say.
Yeah. So it was a tale of two walks, the Zimbabwean side and the Zambian side, and you're quite right. A lot of it was in the bush, and a lot of it did involve the wild animals. We had a couple of close encounters with elephants. But I was accompanied the whole way on both sides by professional rangers for my own security who were armed, and they were able to persuade the elephants that they needed to turn around and walk the other way rather than charge, which I felt huge relief about. But you had to be aware of that the whole time. There was a time when we were camping, 2:00 in the morning. 10 lions came right past our tents within 5 or 10 yards of our tents. They were on a hunting expedition. If we'd been out of our tents at the time, which a couple of us had been just 2 or 3 minutes beforehand, we would have ended up as the prey. So you had to be very aware of that. But it was it was wonderful to actually see that. And conversely, on the Zambian side, the bush was absolutely beautiful. The people I met were fantastic, but there were no animals. There were no wild animals on the Zambian side, and I felt as if the spirit was missing from the Zambian side of the walk. There little things like when you go to the loo at night, you certainly have to shine your torch around first. And if you're in a highly dangerous area, you probably don't get out of your tent. You use some receptacle. But if you're having to go in the middle of the bush, you keep yourself, you tell the rangers where you're going, you move a safe distance away from the camp, you keep an eye out for animals, and you go as quickly as you can. And there was actually, Nicola, I'll just mention this one little thing, that I did have the call of nature, and I did have to go out into the bush on this one occasion. And I'd done my scanning around for animals. I'd made sure that it was safe, and I was squatting down doing my business. And what I hadn't looked out for was the fact that there was a path right next to where I was going, and some lovely old gentleman cycled past me, and we just waved at each other, and he carried merrily on his way. But so there's all sorts of things. It has its dangers.
Well, let's. I'm just going to go back a little bit there. So you said you were in your tents, and a 9-strong hunting party of lions went through your camp. Could you see them, or were you in there zipped up?
So I didn't actually see them. Brother Ed happened to be awake at the time. I think 2 or 3 of us had sort of got up round about that time to go to the loo, and we'd just zipped ourselves back in our tents and were going back to sleep. This was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And Ed had obviously woken up, and he was looking out of his tent through the gauze, mosquito gauze, and he just saw these lions. We were in a camping area where there were a lot of impala. There was is there a hyena making a noise? I think there was. Then suddenly there was silence, dead silence. And then we had heard of about 30 or 40 impala, which are antelope, small antelope, near us. And they started coughing, their warning cough, Ed heard. And then as he was looking out, he just saw them in a long line, just padding along, totally silently, absolutely, but intent on some hunt. It would have been incredible to see, and I wish I'd seen them myself, actually.
I mean, for us soft Westerners here up in Europe, just the thought of a pride of lions going through your camp, it must have been terrifying. I mean, even Ed, the man who's seen more than his fair share of danger. I mean, what's stopping them just take a right turn and slash your tent open? Yeah,
lions, as far as I'm aware, have not been known to take people out of closed tents. Not far from where we were a few years ago, there was someone taken out of their tent by lions, and sadly didn't make it. But he had left his tent unzipped, despite being told to zip himself in. So as far as I'm aware, lions and other animals have never actually taken people out of closed tents. There's something about that wall that stops them doing that. But never, ever, ever leave your tent unzipped in areas like that. Not only for lions, hyenas, that sort of stuff, but you never know what slithery creatures like snakes might climb in.
You're not really selling it, are you? I mean, I can't think of a worse way to go than getting dragged out of your tent by a lion. That's up there.
Absolutely.
That's up there with your real nightmare material, isn't it? A giant fanged and clawed beast that wants to eat you. Yeah,
it is. But I must stress that it is actually so lovely being out there in the middle of the bush, in the middle of the night, knowing that those wild animals are there, and knowing that you are safe in your tent. You just keep your tent zipped up. I mean, it's just common sense. You protect yourself as much as possible, and no one has been known to be taken out of a tent that has been totally enclosed. So, it's as safe as it can be, and that's part of the excitement and the fun and the sort of being part of the bush and part of nature.
And did you manage to get a decent night's sleep? And I'm not saying because there's lions around. I'm saying out of fear. I mean, with the heat and maybe potentially uncomfortable ground. I guess after you've been walking all day, you'd be pretty tired, eh?
You're pretty knackered. At 53, my bones are not as young as they used to be, so it took a little bit of getting used to, but you do, in the end, get used to it. I don't think, unless you're on some sort of, deluxe mattress, anyone's ever going to have a full night's sleep, from 8 till 6 or whatever it might be. So you're always awake every couple of hours or so, but you get used to it. You get into the swing of it. You get used to the sort of rhythm of the sleep that you have, and you do feel very refreshed. You do hear, because you're in very thin canvas tents, you do hear everything that's going around you. There's one occasion when I know I had a couple of hyenas sniffing around by my head. But again, that's all they were doing. They weren't going to break into the tent. So you're aware of that, and you're aware of all the nighttime noises. But yeah, you get a good night's sleep in the end. And you are pretty knackered by, when you've done 6, 7, 8 hours of walking in that heat.
So what about hyenas? Because they're quite fascinating. They've got incredibly powerful jaws. I think one of the animals with one of the biggest or the strongest bites, mammals that is, going around. Are they man-eaters? Would they take a human if they could? I presume they would.
Do you know, hyenas are much maligned. They are they're a wonderful animal. They may be scavengers. And so we all sort of look at them and say, ooh, those are nasty little animals that scavenge. But they're not. They're absolutely beautiful animals that have a huge job and responsibility of keeping the bush clean. Are they man-eaters? Have they been known to take people? I think they have taken a chomp at people from time to time, but they generally keep away if challenged, light or fire or something like that. So, yeah, you don't hear of them often. Again, I have heard of times when people have sort of gone out for a walk in the bushes in the middle of the day and left their tent unzipped, where hyenas have smelt a leather-bound book or a bit of food in the tent, and they've gone in and helped themselves to it. But yeah, I mean, they, like any wild animal, you do have to treat them with caution. And there was one occasion, I think, Ed was there as well, and we were listening to the sound of this hyena that had come and helped itself to the remains of some supper that we'd left in the Le Creuset pot. And it was doing its best to damage that pot. And I have to say that Le Creuset pots stand up to hyena jaws extremely well. It didn't break at all. That's a sort of long-winded answer to your question, man.
Well, and you mentioned you had your 2 rangers with you at all times. I presume these are locals. And are these, forgive me if I get the wrong term, are they bushmen? Are they native, people who've been living off the land and know the area very well? Is that that's the kind of ranger I would want?
Yeah. So first and foremost, they're all professional rangers employed by the Department of National Parks, Zimbabwe Parks or Zambian Parks. So they've had a lot of training. They've had a lot of weapons training. They've had a lot of training about the bush, but they're also interested in their job. They want to do this. They're there to protect and look after the wildlife and the environment. So, are they sort of bushmen? Well, they joke about themselves being the bushmen, yes, and they're very knowledgeable. I mean, I learned a lot about different plants and the medicinal properties of different plants from these rangers, and they're very dedicated, very professional people who are doing their best in sometimes very difficult circumstances to preserve what's left, to conserve what's there. They get involved in running battles with poachers. They're always finding snares. They're having to arrest people on the lake for illegal netting of fish. They don't have a comfortable life, but they are very professional. I felt 100% safe in their hands, and I did have different rangers accompany at different times depending on which national park they were in at the time, and they were all fantastic, really, really, really good people.
So you mentioned when you were in Zambia that there were very little animals. Is that a result of perhaps they haven't got quite as good a conservation program, or is it or could it be more the fact that it's just not their type of habitat? What's the situation there? So
the habitat's exactly the same as it is on the Zimbabwe side. Beautiful bush, lots of birds, insects, reptiles like lizards. When the lake filled, the southern side of the lake, so the Zimbabwe side of the lake, was designated as a national park. And there are actually a number of different national parks along the lake shore. The Zambian side didn't do that. So it never has been a national park. And as a result, the animals were slowly wiped out as people killed them for meat. And they've never been reintroduced. There's a lot of hope there, because I think with all the people that are living there, there is the ability to create community game management areas where the communities themselves can set up game parks and game management areas where they actually benefit from the tourist dollars. Don't forget, a lot of these people are extremely poor and have no real income other than a few cattle and goats that they have. So yeah, I think it's just that on the Zimbabwe side, they immediately went into conservation mode back in the 1960s, and in Zambia they didn't. Having said that, Zambia, I think, has about 35% of its countryside reserved for national parks. So I'm only just talking about, the area that I saw, the little bit of Zambia that I walked around. So I don't want to malign Zambia in any way. It was just very sad, having done the Zimbabwe side, to see no wild animals there. But it would be perfectly possible to reintroduce them in the future.
And so you have to tell me your elephant story.
Which elephant story?
The one you said you had a couple of elephant encounters.
Yeah. Well, there was. We just had a changeover of rangers, and I was now in the Matuzadona National Park, which is absolutely beautiful and very, very well managed. And we were walking through some fairly thick bush, and as we came out of the bush into an open area, about 15 yards away, there was this big bull elephant that we hadn't seen until we'd come out of the bush itself. And one of the rangers gave a very low whistle, and immediately they pushed me behind them, which I was very grateful for, while this elephant sort of took a couple of steps towards us and thought about charging. It actually took 3 or 4 steps towards us, ready to charge. And the rangers were busy telling it, no, don't do that, and shouting, whistling at it. And luckily, in the end, it decided not to, turn around and walked away. And the rangers were great. They then told me afterwards, if you see it lift its trunk up and put its ears back, then you've got to start running. But that same area, just before I forget, Nicola, if you don't mind, the rangers pointed out to me some old settlements that were there and bits of old pottery from these settlements. Now, apparently there is in that area, which I didn't see, I only learned about afterwards, there are a couple of settlements there where the pottery actually has inscriptions on it that are Omani in origin. So in other words, there was trade, they're thinking 500 years ago, between the Omani Empire and the various tribes and the empires of that part of Southern Africa, which makes one think quite a bit, doesn't it?
Well, how did they get up there? Can you navigate that far up the Zambezi River?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can. You can navigate that far up the Zambezi River. There are a few rapids and things. I think people also walked. I think there were, great big sort of treks of people. I'm assuming a lot of it's to do with the old slave trade, as well as trading gold. But it's quite an interesting little fact.
That's a very good point, actually. You never think about, because we tend to think from our perspective, we tend to think of the slave trade as being on the west of Africa. But what we forget, or perhaps we aren't taught, is that slave trade has been going on for a hell of a long time, a lot longer than people would probably give it credit for. So yeah, I can imagine people going up the river to, grab a few people and take them back and sell them. It's horrific as it sounds, but I guess that was very common back then. Jesus. Not very nice.
It was very common. And a lovely little story I heard, I'm assuming it's a lovely story, is that the Zambian ranger was telling me that there were a bunch of African Americans who had gone through all the DNA tests and discovered that they'd actually come from a part of Western Zambia originally. Their ancestors had come from there and had obviously been taken as slaves, sent to America. And these people are now coming back. I think there's a group of 30 or 40 of them that are actually coming back to their roots as potential investors in that part of Western Zambia, which I think is a lovely sort of story to sort of cap the horrors of the slave trade, and actually seeing these people coming back, discovering their roots, bringing investors in, much needed investment into different parts of Africa.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. It's a bit like a Scottish guy going to America back in the 1900s or the 1800s, making a ton of cash, and then going back home and building fantastic public works for people. If they could do the same thing there, that'd be incredible.
It'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I know. Very interesting.
So, what you said when on the Zimbabwe side of the lake, the roads, etc., the roads and paths were pretty good, and then you said there was nothing on the Zambian side. So, how are you getting around?
So, the walk was a team effort. A lot of people were involved in it. I was the one who was doing the walking, did the whole thing, but there were a lot of people involved in it, including a couple of support vehicles. So the nature of the terrain is such that making roads is very hard, and then maintaining them is difficult. I walked some of the time in the bush, some of the time on roads. The Zambian side, at the beginning, the roads were very bad, and then they became gradually better as we got closer to the major centers. So there was, the first, week, 10 days, the roads were not wonderful, and some of them were just tracks. Luckily, we had Ed's four-wheel drive Toyota there, so we were able to sort of do a bit of bundu bashing along these tracks. And in fact, the beginning of the Zambian side was so remote that we couldn't actually drive down to the beginning where opposite where I finished on the Zimbabwe side, and had to walk there in order to walk back. And there were children in that part who've never actually seen a white person before, which I found absolutely fascinating. Never seen a white person.
Well, I mean, this is going to sound very stupid and naive, but not even on TV. I'm guessing they have no TV either.
No, you're right. There is no TV. There's no electricity. They rely on fire for light, or some of them have solar lamps or something that they've been given. But no, definitely not on TV. And they don't. There was at that same place they just started up a preschool for the really little children, and they didn't have basics like pictures. I took a giraffe with me, a toy giraffe with me, all the way around on the walk. And I showed this to the children, and they didn't know what it was. And there was a guy there who was a teacher, and he said, "Look, if you can help with anything, just pictures of animals, we would really love it." So it's very, very basic in some parts, where they have no electricity, no television, no books, no nothing really, apart from what I consider to be the most wonderful thing, which is all that wide open space and bush.
And so they are hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers?
Subsistence farmers, yeah. Subsistence farmers. So, the ones that live along the lake tend to fish for a living. So they catch fish and they sell them. The ones that are living further inland tend to rely on what little they can grow when there is water, and quite often there isn't. And then they have what I consider to be some incredibly healthy-looking cattle and goats. Cattle, goats, chickens, tame guinea fowl, and a few pigs. So they rely on their ability to raise animals for survival, yeah.
So if we do have a nuclear war, which is looking increasingly likely, these are the people that are going to survive, aren't they, Nick? These are the ones who know how to look after themselves compared to us softies.
100%. If we're going to have a nuclear war, the one place I would like to be is in that part of the world, and for any number of reasons. But to avoid some of the nuclear fallout and survive, and just to survive. Those guys live on very, very little there, and they have had it hard. And yet they've always got a smile on their face, funny enough. They are always smiling, always cheerful, such kind, such lovely people. Wherever I went, they were always willing to share whatever they had with me. And in some cases, that was just water. But I tell you what, water was at a premium when I was walking. So, so it was very gratefully received.
That's because they don't have mortgages and tax, electricity bills, all the kind of things that makes our life miserable.
But we don't have elephants that can destroy our vegetable garden and therefore our means of survival overnight.
Yeah, that's a good point. But in general, are these people who are living there, are they healthy? Are they in good shape?
Do you know, I'm smiling because yes, they are. They're in very good shape and very healthy. And the tribe of people living around that lake that are mostly associated with the Zambezi Valley, which is where the lake is, are known as the Tonga. And actually, when the lake was created, people had to be moved away, otherwise their settlements would have been drowned. And the same tribe, cousins and families, live either side of the lake. Talking to one of the rangers who was showing me a lot about the medicinal properties of different plants, he said, the Tonga never, ever got sick until AIDS arrived. So generally, they were totally healthy. They always knew what to take. So they had some remedies for snake bites, or they knew what to do if a baby had colic. They knew which leaves to boil up. And, if you got injured by an animal, which wasn't very often because they learned to coexist with animals. It's only more recently that they haven't. So, yeah, extremely healthy and tough and strong. And it was only when AIDS arrived in whenever it was, the early 80s, that they started to get sick.
It's a weird one with AIDS. I don't know much about it, but I thought it was an immunodeficiency type of thing. You'd have thought that people who are living off the land, tough, healthy, eating, probably the cleanest diet you can get on this planet, you'd have thought they'd have been pretty resilient to this kind of thing. But, I don't know much about it. So here's a question for you, and it's pertinent. How was their mental health?
When I was walking through and describing why I was doing what I was doing to sort of raise awareness about conservation, mental health, and mental well-being, they totally understood the conservation side. They struggled to understand the fact that the bush was good for mental well-being. And I think that's because they've never had to. Their mental health, I would say, was very good. I would say their mental resilience is even better because they've had to learn to live with a number of hardships. When there's a drought, it's a very serious business. They get no food. So their mental resilience is very high. Their mental health, I would say, is good. We, with mortgages and electricity bills and school fees and all that sort of stuff, have got constant worries. We're hardly smiling at all. The people I met were always smiling, always having a joke, always laughing. And I reckon that's quite a good sign of how good their mental health actually is.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who's doing it right? Because we discussed this, your brother and I discussed this on the last podcast we did. And we were talking about the effect of being in nature, how good it is for your mental health. And the loss of connection to nature. I mean, just, if you're not feeling great, go for a walk in the woods and you feel better. That's just a given, right? That's just fresh air. That I don't know what it is. There's something in there that makes you feel good. But we've lost this connection to nature, which for certain people, especially if you're living in big cities and stuff, you've got this catastrophic effect, I would say, on mental health. And whether you realize it or not, is kind of, I would say, largely irrelevant. But when Ed was talking about what your charity that you're setting up, that was one of the things that one of the reasons he was setting up. It was to get people out there and to talk about or to learn about conservation, etc. So, if you could tell us a bit as well about what your plan is for these. How do you say, mentally wounded ex-servicemen and ex-policemen, etc., who are going to come out and hopefully help out with the conservation effort.
Yeah. So the plan is, the answer is we don't have all the answers, but we do know that the bush and being out in nature is very, very therapeutic. So the plan is, for 3 weeks at a time, is to bring out people who'd like to come out to Zimbabwe, out into the wild, out into the bush, where they can, first of all, relax and be themselves. Secondly, they can help with community projects such as building a school or renovating a piece of land or planting trees or whatever it might be. And thirdly, interacting with animals and just being out in the bush and actually interacting. There are so many things that can be done that, we're going to play it a little bit by ear. We just know that being out there for that 3 weeks, you're going to go back feeling an awful lot better. And you'll have something to refer to. Just little things like sitting out at night under the stars and watching the shooting stars, or watching a crocodile swim by in the lake, or watching impala grazing, or just sitting there while an elephant walks past, and then actually doing some good in terms of helping communities build a fence, dig their gardens, put up bomas for their cattle, which are kraals for stopping lions, all sorts of little things like that, which is basically just an act of giving and an act of helping other people, which hopefully will help the people who are, as you put it, mentally wounded and in need of something totally different. I mean, it is totally different to anything most of these people will ever have experienced.
Well, I can imagine seeing a lion in the wild or having an encounter, and a frightening encounter with a lion. Your problems will pale into insignificance. So you're going to get a right shock and realize what is actually important in your life. And another thing which where I live, it's not too bad. We get, because I'm up in the mountains, and there's not too much light pollution, so you can still see the stars. That's one of the things it's on my hit list to come to Zimbabwe and see what you guys are up to, hopefully in the next few years for sure, is to actually be in the bush, no light pollution, and look at the stars, because that's something I remember as a kid. And I actually visited South Africa when I I was young. It must have been maybe 1980 or 1979. Maybe 1980 it would have been. And that was one thing I remember really quite clearly. We were driving back from somewhere in my uncle's car, and the Milky Way was in full effect. And it's something to this day sticks in my head. It's just how many... sometimes I can see it here, sometimes, but it's not the same. It's like not even 100th, not even 1,000th of the resolution of what you get, and it is a marvel that you see these pictures on social media and stuff of the Milky Way, and you think, wow, that must be CGI or artificially enhanced, but it's absolutely not. If you get it on the right night, it's in something. It's the marvel of I don't know, the universe or nature or whatever you want to call it, but it's something I haven't seen since I was 7 years old properly.
Yeah, isn't that sad, Nicole? It's and there is no light pollution out in so much of that part of Africa, of the world. It's absolutely fantastic. I would just sit until I started falling asleep just watching those stars, and then you see the shooting stars going by, and then trying to identify the different constellations, Orion, the Southern Cross, the Scorpio, the Swordsman, whatever it is. And as you say, the Milky Way, it really is milky. So I would definitely get out there sooner rather than later. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had some guests who ocean rowers. So they're out. There's zero light pollution out there, and that's one of their favorite things to talk about was actually the stars, the night sky. On when there when there was no moon, and they said it was just insane, absolutely insane. Yeah, it's something. It's a shame we don't get to see that. You kind of wonder if does it have to be this way? I'm not sure. Are they trying to hide this marvel from us? I don't know. I'm getting a bit conspiratorial, but there's a reason for it being there. This is the reason our civilizations evolved is because we learned about the stars and navigation and all these wonderful things that came from it. So anyway, before I go down a rabbit hole, and so
well, you're so right. You're so right. You know, I was, and it's all part and parcel of what our world is about. You know, it's not just the trees and the animals. It is the stars. It is the atmosphere. It's everything that makes up our world. And I don't know if you saw, allegedly, William Shatner, who was in Star Trek, wasn't he? He popped up into space a few months ago. And he was really excited about going up to space. And then when he got there, he was, I say allegedly because I've just been reading it, and I don't know if he actually said this, but he felt such sadness that, you know, he looked down on Earth and thought, why are we doing all this up here when we should be looking after what we've got left? And I must say I agree with him. You know, we're spending a fortune on trying to see if we can inhabit Mars. Why? Let's spend that fortune on looking after what we've got here, because it's pretty damn good.
I was listening to a guy talking about Mars and but Earth being very special. I think I don't have to go too far into that. There's a lot of things in our favor, which means that we can live on this planet. Some would say that the chances are very, very slim that we should be able to live here and that we should actually exist. But we have a molten core, right? Whereas the one in Mars is apparently is dead. It's a dead planet. There's no, I don't think there's any magnetism or anything. Well, I'm sure there is some, but they haven't got that molten core that we've got, which creates basically everything we've got. And I agree. Why? What's the point of doing, spending all this money to go to Mars? I mean, who really wants to go there? And if we maintain our own countries and have our own, try and make it so that it's as pleasant as possible in the countryside and as wild as we can possibly make it. I understand we've got to feed people, etc. And I had a guy on last year who is big into rewilding, which is a big thing in the UK right now. And then you don't have to go take a plane, fly to Africa, drive up there to see the night sky and to see nature. You could, do it in your own country or in your own backyard effectively. It's we live in a strange world, Nick. It's everything seems a bit upside down.
It is very much upside down. And we've got a lot of the answers for making it a better place and for actually reversing what we need to reverse. I have a saying: if you nurture nature, nature will nurture us. So, that's all we really need to do. And yet we're intent on destroying ourselves. But it's not going to take much. You saw when COVID struck, there were dolphins swimming in Venice, and the sort of smog map over Beijing or whatever it was cleared up. So it only takes a few months for nature to sort of rebalance itself, and we allow a few more whales to live rather than harvest them. We're sort of capturing more carbon. Whales are responsible for more carbon capture than trees. We know all this. We stop producing our planet. I'll give you a very good example of something that's really destructive, and that is plastics. There was someone in Zimbabwe was telling me about a cormorant that had died, and they'd opened it up, and they had basically discovered a whole heap of microplastics in its gullet. So the cormorant itself was able to eat. It was chucking fish down its throat and absolutely having a whale of a time. Those microplastics had stopped it from digesting. So it was starving to death despite the number of fish. Now, that's one cormorant in one part of the world where there isn't as much plastic as there is, say, in the UK or parts of Europe. And then I read somewhere else that they've discovered microplastic in mother's milk. So I'm going off at a tangent, but there are things we can do about that, and it doesn't take much, and it's not too big for any one person to deal with in a small way, in some little way that they can, whether it's recycling or growing organic vegetables or whatever it might be. It's not too big a task. We've got the technology, we've got the answers, we've got the know-how. We've just got to do it.
And while I agree with you, and whenever you go on the beach and you see plastic on the beach, I take my kids down there and we always take a bag and we always pick up as much as we can. That's my little kind of lesson for my kids, is just pick some stuff up and take some back. that's my for the good karma for the day.
Yep.
But we do need plastics, because in the old days, if you wanted some glasses, those tortoiseshell glasses that we wear now, they're plastic. They used to be actually tortoiseshell, so or whalebone for certain things. So yes, we do need plastics, but how is it that we can't invent a plastic that decomposes after a certain amount of time, or you can throw it in a vat of some chemical and it creates something quite good?
Well, we can, and there are actually microbes that have been discovered that can eat plastic. So it's just a question of getting it out and getting it out to the rest of the world. Yeah, absolutely, we need plastic until something else comes along. But we can manage it in such a way that it's not harmful to the environment, not harmful to animals, not killing off our oceans and our seas and polluting the place. So yeah, we've got the know-how. We're just not using it.
Well, when we've got kids as well, and it's very sad, and it's something that I would like, if something could be done about it. And I guess we're talking like this, I suppose, and what you're doing is part of the solution. So I'm very happy to have you on. So what's the future then, Nick? How's it looking for you guys?
It's looking good. I'm hoping that, as a result of this walk, and as a result of people like you very kindly inviting me to come and talk about it, that we're going to be able to get the message out. It's a big one. Conservation's big in its own right. Mental health is big in its own right. We've linked the two because, you've got to conserve what you've got in order to provide an environment that people are mentally happy in, whether it's a park in New York or the African bush. So it's looking good. And I think I haven't come across anyone yet who disagrees with what we're saying and what we're doing. And we're not pretending, I think I said earlier, we're certainly not pretending to be experts. We don't have the answers. We're going on gut instinct here. But no one has come to me and said, you're going about this all wrong. So I think we've got to build up a movement. We need to build up the support to make it work. We're not doing this for any glory. We're not doing this to say, I told you so, or anything like that. We're just trying to do it because, you talked about our children. I don't know how old your kids are, but my daughter's 20 and my son's 15. I think they're starting to feel the pressure, the weight on their own shoulders about having to save the world. And that's pretty unfair. When I was 20, I certainly wasn't thinking like that. In fact, we were going about probably destroying a lot of the world unwittingly, unknowingly. But they're not. And I don't think that's very nice for them. I think they've got to have a bit of fun as well. They've got to enjoy themselves, but they're definitely feeling that pressure about having to save the world. Otherwise, their grandchildren may not see very much.
I know. Yeah, you're right. It is putting a burden on them. But saying that, I've always got faith in the younger generation. I expect they'll do good things. And so, when does your mental health program start? When are you going to start getting people across to your neck of the woods to experience this?
Yeah, so we're basically just sort of wrapping up the walk and doing all the thanks and all the administrative side of things. As soon as we can. We haven't actually set a date to it, but we would love to get a group of about 20, 25 people, veterans from this country, to come out to Zimbabwe and to experience a 3-week trip there, doing exactly what I described, getting immersed in the bush, helping a local community, rebuilding something that needs rebuilding. There's all sorts of stuff that can be done. So, we're open to doing this as soon as we possibly can. And I suppose the next steps are to talk to a lot of the mental health charities, a lot of the veterans charities. I believe in the UK, there's something like 240, 250 veterans associations, let alone all the sort of first responders, the ambulance, the fire and all that. So, yeah, we haven't set a date, but, probably in the next 2 or 3 months, we'll be looking to get a group of people out there. So if you want to come and experience it firsthand, come.
I would absolutely love to, but I'm going to have to bring my family. There's no way I'm going to get away with that one. So I might have to wait because my daughter's only 2 and she'd be a nice little snack for a lion. And she's not scared of anything. She's just oblivious to danger, and just wanders off. Anyway, we might have to wait a year or two, but
yeah.
So, Nick, I genuinely wish you all the best, and it's been a real fun chatting with you, because I find it I like it. It's a fascinating subject. I just love that you're able to do this. It just sounds like such a cool job, and then go and walk around the largest man-made lake in the world. So do you want to give us some websites where we can get some more information, people can check it out, and maybe even sign up for some of your what would you call them?
Yeah. Well, it's called Consolidated Africa Services, PVO, which stands for Private Voluntary Organization. There's actually the easiest thing is we've put the walk and a lot of why it's happened and all of that on a single web page. It's called Linktree. I don't know if you've heard of this, which shows the LinkedIn, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Facebook social media sites that people can click on. And it's literally linktr.ee/CASPVO. I can WhatsApp that to you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do, and I'll put it in the description when I publish this, and so they can find out. And then, what would you call? I'm not going to say retreat, because that sounds like it's a bit of a spa holiday. But what would you call it with these 3-week excursions?
Do you know, it's funny you should ask that.
I think I talked to your brother about this. We were trying to figure out a word for it. It's like, yes, we did actually.
And he and I were talking about it, because mental health is becoming too much of a catchword. Everyone's using it. All the media's using it, and everyone. It's cool to have mental health problems, and for the younger generation, for the older generation, it's not so cool. So, what we're calling it at the moment, until someone can come up with a better expression, is intrapersonal tourism. So IPT. So intra is more your sort of, as opposed to intrapersonal tourism.
Intrapersonal.
Intrapersonal. So it's all about yourself.
I just found the notes from when I was chatting to your bro, and I think we came up with 2. Know thyself was one of them, and the other one was wellness journeys. So that's a little bit sort of hippy dippy.
Yeah.
But that's effectively what they are. And I don't really like that phrase, wellness journeys, but it kind of, people understand when you say that word. So
yeah, and I think it's the other way of looking at it is I think Ed came up with this, is sort of break your routine with routine breaks, which is another way of looking at it. So I don't think there's any one way at the moment. So if anyone can come up with an expression, is great. Intrapersonal travel is just the one that we sort of settled on for now. But no. We need to find a better descriptor.
Put it out to the listeners.
Yeah, put it out to the listeners.
Well, Nick Holme, I really appreciate you coming on. You're doing God's work, and I really wish you all the best, and I've had a real fun time chatting with you.
I've really enjoyed it, Nickel. Thank you. And as ever with something like this, I think we could have carried on talking for forever and a day. But thank you very, very much for having me on. I'm very grateful to you.
Well, when next time there's something comes along, if there's any breakthroughs or whatever, you just let me know and you come back on and tell us about it. It'd be fun.
That's really kind.
Yeah, what we were talking about yesterday was very interesting. So that would be a good podcast in itself. But that's for another day.
That's for another day, exactly.
So thanks for coming on, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.